his discharge is unclean. Now, this is his uncleanliness in regards to his discharge, whether his body secretes his discharge or blocks his discharge. He is unclean. All the days that his body has a discharge or his body blocks his discharge, this is his uncleanness. See what the footnote has there. The contrast between the dripping or the flowing. Okay. One might not understand that even though a blockage actually caused a lack of discharge, it is still unclean. Okay. Anyway, this is to point out when stuff leaves your body, you become unclean by the nature of things coming out of your body. Doesn't mean they're not natural. It's just there's a separation between those things that happen, whether natural or not, whether for men or women, menstruation for women, we're talking about men here, it makes you unclean. You are not ceremonially able to go into the temple and worship or gather with the people until you have taken and cleansed yourself. Any bed the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean, and any furniture he sits on will be unclean. So again, we're going to the transference of cleanliness or uncleanliness happens by the person in the state of uncleanness moving on to some other place. So wherever it's happening, that too. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. So there's also a time limit here, like that you remain until the end of the day, until evening, and the evening is the beginning of the next day. So you begin your day returning to cleanness. The one who sits on the furniture the man with a discharge sits on must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. The one who touches the body of a man with a discharge must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If the man with a discharge spits on a person who is ceremonially clean, that person must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. So all of a sudden we have can transfer uncleanness by spitting upon a person. Like, is this an intentional spitting upon? What is the reason for the spitting? Oh, it doesn't have any information there. Just, if suddenly I decide to spit on you when I'm unclean, you'll become unclean as well. Any means of riding that the man with the discharge rides on will be unclean. So whatever river transportation you're using. Anyone who touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. And the one who carries those items must wash their clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone whom the man with the discharge touches without having rinsed his hands in water must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. A clay vessel which the man with the discharge touches must be broken, and any wooden utensils must be rinsed in water. So, like I don't want to say extreme, but the uncleanness transfer, we're trying to cover any kind of situation here. So a clay vessel that which the man with the discharge touches can mean vessel, utensil, implement, article. An article of clay would refer to a vessel or container of some sort, while one made of wood would refer to some kind of tool or instrument. So not sure if this is meaning direct contact with just the man himself because he's unclean, or with the discharge in the regards to the vessel of clay or the wooden utensils. The wooden utensils can be rinsed in water, but the clay, notice when we had other things that touch clay, it gets broken. There is no cleansing of the clay. You destroy something made of clay. Pastor Pagans, good to see you, friend. Hope you're doing well. When the man with a discharge becomes clean from his discharge, he is to count off for himself 7 days for his purification, and he must wash his clothes and bathe in fresh water and be clean. So if you have a contact with the person who's unclean, you just remain unclean until evening, but the person who is unclean has a longer duration. So if we were talking about moms giving birth and them being unclean, which we have, now we are talking about men, and the same thing can be said of them where they have uncleanness and they need restoration of cleanliness. So just like menstruation, you have 7 days, or I should say after giving birth, you have 7 days for male children and 7 for the female children and 7 days for yourself as a woman. So you have 14 days if it's a female child. We now have a purification in a similar vein for the men. Okay, 7 days for his purification, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in fresh water, and be clean. Then on the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, and he has to present himself before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the priest. And the priest is to make one of them for a sin offering, purification offering, and the other as a burnt offering. So the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord for his discharge. So there's the process. Here's how you get restored to community, and it's going to take 2 doves or 2 pigeons. When a man has a seminal emission, he must bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. He must wash in water any clothing or leather that has semen on it, and is unclean until evening. As for a woman whom a man goes to bed with, then has a seminal emission, they must bathe in water and be unclean until evening. So now we switched from this discharge that's happening, which is, I don't think, the natural process. It's something else that's going on. Or I shouldn't say natural. It's natural in some way, but it's not the semen that's coming out. It's a discharge. It's something else that's going on, whether it's blacked up or it comes out. It doesn't go into all the details there. But here we have, if semen gets on stuff, it is unclean. And if you have sex, you're unclean until evening. So you are unclean until evening. Both the man and the woman are unclean, and you must bathe and be unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge and her discharge is blood from her body, she is to be on her menstruation 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Okay, so we have more specific here on the menstruation that's coming in. So just like but notice the male discharge was talked about first, now the female, which for some reason, most people focus on the fact that menstruation makes you unclean. They skip over the man being unclean. Anything she lies on during her menstruation will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. So this is the same treatment that we had for a man with a discharge. Anything that the couch, the bed is unclean. So the transference happens because the person is a state of uncleanness, and objects that they touch become unclean by transference, by their being contaminated on top of them. Anyone who touches her bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches any furniture she sits on must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If there is something on the bed or on the furniture she sits on, when he touches it, he will be unclean until evening. So if there's a pillow on the bed, whatever it is, it transfers it. This uncleanness is not vile. We already had men as well. So it is when some fluid is leaving the body. You are not in a state of cleanness is what is happening. So it's not vile. It is natural. It simply separates you from being in a normal state with everyone else because you are in a different state. So it is not you have to have restoration from this period of time before you can have contact with people or before you can go into the temple or tabernacle. So that's nothing vile. It's just unclean. So the same way a person with a disease is unclean. There's nothing vile about having a disease. It's just a state that you have. And until that state is corrected to no longer being in that state, you become unclean until that time that you are no longer in that state. And if a man actually goes to bed with her so that her menstrual impurity touches him, then he will be unclean 7 days, and any bed he lies on will be unclean. So, touching the person, touching something that touched the person is one thing, but if you go further, you are going to fully transfer the uncleanness for 7 days upon you. And, we don't get a reason why. When things are declared unclean, as they are right here, we're saying these things are unclean. These are the things that are unclean. The animals, they were unclean. Now we have bodily discharge is unclean. We're not getting a rationale for why. We are simply saying these are different. And one of the things that we have is the people of God have agreed to being different than the nations around them, being separate and set apart. And now we're getting the rules around what does it mean to be separate and set apart as people who follow after the true God instead of the gods of the nations. And so this is one of those. Now we don't get a why. We haven't seen a why yet for things being called unclean. They simply are declared that by God. Okay. When a woman's discharge of blood flows many days, not at the time of her menstruation. So now we're talking about it's not menstruation. And if it flows beyond the time of her menstruation, all the days of her discharge of impurity will be like the days of her menstruation. She is unclean. So if it's something other than menstruation that is happening and you have a blood flow, you are unclean. When blood is flowing, you are unclean. This is why when we jump to the New Testament and there is the woman who had a blood flow for 12 years, she was unclean for 12 years. She could not go into the temple and associate anything that she touched, anything that she touched or sat on would have been unclean. She definitely could not go into a place like a synagogue, which was clean, and then sit somewhere, it would become unclean. She couldn't go into the temple either. So we have all of those things. So this is where those ideas are coming from that we see played out in the New Testament. Any bed she lies on all the days of her discharge will be to her like the bed of her menstruation. Any furniture she sits on will be unclean like the impurity of her menstruation, and anyone who touches them will be unclean, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. So, if you don't like baths, don't go touch people that are unclean. Don't come into contact with them because you got to wash your clothes, you got to take a bath, and then you're still unclean until evening. If she becomes clean from her discharge, then she is to count on for herself 7 days, and afterwards she will be clean. So just like the men who are unclean because of body discharge, women are unclean for 7 days. Now, I don't think that this, because it says from her discharge, this does not say from menstruation. So I don't think this is a monthly thing that women have to do. This is for a one that is not an ordinary one. Then on the 8th day, she must take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and she must bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And the priest is to make one for a sin or purification offering, and the other for a burnt offering. So the priest is to make atonement for her before the Lord from her discharge of impurity. See the label here, it's a discharge of impurity. So she is just a state of not being pure. That's it. It is not sin. And this is where some have gone to translate this as purification offering because you're in a state of impurity, and there's an offering that restores you to purity. So the match there is a purity offering instead of calling it a sin offering. Sin, we have a connotation that sin means you've done something wrong. So a sin offering would be an offering for something you did wrong. Therefore, we read into bodily fluids coming out of you as sin doing something wrong. So that's probably, Christopher, where your questions come from, is people using that language of sin offering when it should probably be translated in more of a purification offering, because it's a restoration from a state of impurity. That's not anything that you did wrong. It's simply the state that you are in, and we are purifying you now so that you can go back into the presence of the community and the presence of God. Thus you are to set the Israelites apart from their impurity, so that they do not die in their impurity by defiling my tabernacle. See, you don't want to go into the tabernacle while you are impure. That would defile the tabernacle, which is in their midst. So we don't want that. So they would die in their impurity by going in there. So this is the reason why these things is to keep the sacred, holy place that's been set aside and purified from becoming impure. This is the law for the one with a discharge, for the one with any seminal emissions, and becomes unclean by it, for the one who is sick in her menstruation, for the one with a discharge, whether male or female, and for a man who goes to a bed with a woman, with an unclean woman. Okay, so if you are coming into contact with someone in an impure state, you become impure, unclean by their uncleanness, impurity. And here is the way in order to get that state restored back to proper relationship. That is why it is talking about the, atonement. To atone for is to bring back to the proper state of things. So you've made atonement, you've made restoration so that things are back the way that they are intended to be.